G'day everyone and welcome to the first webinar in our Digital Literacy for Your Club webinar series, which follows on from the webinar series which we've been running over the last few weeks, primarily focused, given its timing, unsurprisingly, on the impacts of the coronavirus shutdown on sport, recreation and community organisations over the continent and the world, in fact. So we're now launching this next series, which, as you can see, is all about technology. And tonight's session is a bit of an intro, talking broadly about mindset and making better use of technology and being more willing in our community organisation to do so. Typically, we often get asked some really pertinent questions about how groups can be making better use of technology, and should we be spending money on technologies available to streamline our operations? Should we just be focusing on the stuff that's free? And these are some of the things that we'll be talking through over the coming few weeks and starting to touch on this evening. So we're going to cover a broad range of issues in this series. We're going to talk about social media and better connecting with members and potential members through various social media platforms, and also ensuring a healthy web presence. We'll be looking into digital tools for managing club money, using software to manage club assets, online tools for meetings, can be making use of to make their lives a little easier. Head to cprgroup.com.au/webinars to register for those upcoming sessions. You can also access all of our historical webinars, which are all recorded at any time. My name's Steve. I can see a bunch of familiar names on the list of attendees, so welcome back to those of you who've been participating in some or all of our previous webinars, and welcome to those names that I don't recognise. I'm a self-professed nerd. Nerd is a term of endearment at CPR Group, and to be honest, we're always kind of trying to out-nerd each other. We're always looking at new ways to do things, new ways to save time, and even as recently as today, we've had some really interesting discussions, which I want to finish tonight's discussion with. So you'll see on, depending on what platform you've joined the webinar from, you should very clearly see a little Q&A button or box. And during the webinar, you can pop into that box any questions that you might have. And if we've got time at the end, we'll come back to those questions and provide some responses. If we don't have time to get to any of the questions that are asked during tonight's session, we'll send you an email or give you a bell tomorrow to talk through your question, particularly in the case of any complex questions, we'll do so. So I want to get started with a bit of a discussion about how rapidly technology has advanced over the past, say, 100 odd years. So this is a picture of a Model T Ford, for those of you who may not recognise it. And check out the simplicity of this machine. It had slow speed, poor fuel economy, no safety features whatsoever. More interesting for me is that real estate sign in the background. And wouldn't it be wonderful to jump back in time and snap up some of this prime waterfront property in La Jolla in San Diego in California? But we can't do that. So we just have to admire the picture. Now, Henry Ford was known to say, if I had have listened to what people wanted, I would have built a faster horse. So it's really interesting to consider the time in which, Henry Ford and others were manufacturing these now quite antiquated vehicles by today's standards. And, like I say, in only a short 100 odd years, we've now got vehicles like this one, which won't be built in Australia anymore. And note the balance for you Ford and Holden fans. One of the reasons that we put this slide in is that our managing director, Michael's a bit of a I like to say bogan, other people like to say revhead, and he drives one of these. So it's even that color. So we pick on him a little bit here at CPR Group. So that's partly why this photo makes its way into this presentation. But this car is getting to the stage of having, some sophisticated technology in it that almost drives itself. It's got a heads-up display, so you don't even need to go to the trouble to look down at your speedo. It's got forward collision avoidance systems, which will slow you down on the highway if you're getting a bit close to the person in front. Lane departure warnings, blind spot alerts, and it even parks itself. Does those dreaded reverse parks automatically. But this is where we're headed. So this is an Australian model of the Tesla Model 3, and this car goes a little further to driving itself than the Holden. But I reckon that this car and other electric vehicles with all sorts of automated technology built in are heading us on a path which I reckon a lot of people really aren't expecting. And futurists are those people whose job it is to try and predict the future. And we're hearing, from some pretty well-respected futurists, and have been over the past couple of years or so, that we might be headed within 20 years to towards a situation where we don't have anyone driving vehicles on the road, but rather they're all automated vehicles. So imagine that all of the vehicles on our road operate essentially as a network-controlled organism. So every vehicle knows where every other vehicle is at any given moment. So if I get into a vehicle which I've ordered through some kind of app, I'm sure that Uber has popped into your minds, or Didi, or any other ride-share apps. So you order some vehicle, it pulls up at your house, you get in, and you tell it where to take you through the app, or you verbally tell it where to take you. And from that moment that your vehicle, or the vehicle in which you're traveling, knows where you're headed, every other vehicle on that network knows where your car is headed also. So even though you might not enter the M1 for 12 minutes, all the vehicles that are going to need to make some adjustment in their speed to let your vehicle in at that particular entrance ramp know 12 minutes in advance that that's going to happen. So if that's the situation that we've got, where every vehicle knows where every other vehicle is going to be at any given moment, who's to say that vehicles couldn't be traveling at 200 or 300 kilometers per hour, particularly on our motorways and highways? So this is interesting because, for us in the sport and recreation world, or for town planners organising what suburbs of the future are going to look like, there's some really important considerations for what we do with the space that is currently taken up by garages at our homes and car parks at our sporting complexes. If we don't all own our own vehicle, and mind you, each of us who probably does own at least one vehicle, spends most of our time not in that vehicle. So it's taking up valuable real estate, whether that's at the office, in the city, at the park and ride train station, or at home. In time to come, if we've got automated vehicles that operate on this network-controlled organism system, and we simply order them through an app, leave their charging pod, pick us up, they might even come back and pick up our husband or wife or kids and drop them to school or wherever they're going for the day, we don't need to own a car. So we'll certainly be able to make far better use of all that space that's currently taken up by car parks at our sporting reserves and so on. And these are the sorts of things that we've got to consider may well happen. And because I'm a bit of a nerd and I like to do some reading and watching and listening on this stuff, I'm really confident that this stuff will happen in our lifetime. And all those people who love to take a Sunday drive in their Ferrari or Buick are going to have to do so maybe on a racetrack or some dedicated driving area other than our day-to-day roads. So fascinating to challenge our thinking of today, which can be really difficult based on today's parameters. And, to think within 20 years that we might have a situation where we're not driving our own cars is quite challenging. But I want to point you to now moving away from travel towards digital media. So this is Walter Cronkite, and he's the bloke who talked the world through the Apollo 11 space mission, the moon landing. In this image, he's talking about home automation of the future, and the console, as small as it is in front of him, controls everything that you can watch on this big screen. With the help of lots of big knobs and dials and buttons, you can flick between sports, movies, TV shows, and so on. Now, what's interesting about this image is that Walter Cronkite, who, was probably regarded as a bit of a futurist in the way that he thought, missed a really clever game-changing move in the world of technology, and that's miniaturization. So this little iPad device, even phones that are costing more and more seemingly by the month, mobile phones, smartphones, these devices can do so much more than that big device that Walter Cronkite was sitting in front of in the last image. Miniaturization and the move to micro mobile computing completely changed the world. And the real living room of the future, which is now, looks nothing like Walt's. We don't typically, I've got a couple of young kids and I'll typically have a bit of a chuckle to myself on a Friday afternoon or Friday night, when I'll push for a family movie night. Let's all sit down and eat popcorn together and watch a movie together. And I'll look around and my wife's on one end of the couch on her phone doing something of great importance, I'm sure. My kids are in each of their bedrooms, or one's in the kids' room on their iPad. We've got this real disconnect because of this move to micro mobile computing. And a lot of people missed that. In 10 or 15 years ago, it would have been far more commonplace for us to all sit around one screen and watch a TV show or movie, or far better, get outside, have a fire and cook some roasted marshmallows. But now it's just such commonplace to see people disconnected and consuming media on their own personal device. And I often laugh when I'm out for dinner. Obviously, it hasn't been happening in the last 6 weeks, but I'll often laugh when I see a couple out for dinner, and the only time they interact with each other is when they show the other person something on their phone. Instead of sitting there and talking and engaging, they're consumed by this micro mobile computing device. So this miniaturization was identified, codified in the mid-1960s by a bloke named Gordon Moore. Now, some of you will have heard this term of Moore's law, and what Moore observed in the mid-60s is that the number of transistors in a dense integrated circuit doubles about every 2 years. So, put simply, computing power doubles every 2 years. So the same size chip becomes twice as powerful. Now, so we're talking exponential growth, and he projected that would happen, if you look at the graph on the left-hand side there, for at least the next decade, to 1975, from when he made his observation in 1965. So the graph on the right shows that in actual fact, the rate of growth has gone far beyond the mid-70s and continues today. That only goes to 2016, that graph, but indeed, we're still seeing this rapid rate of growth. And if you buy a phone a couple after you were planning to replace that phone, the new one will be twice as powerful, according to Moore's law, as the one that you could have bought a couple of years earlier. The other way to consider this is that the cost of computing units decreases exponentially over time. So it's really hard for people to genuinely say, I know everything there is to know about what my club should be doing in a technological sense and in terms of making the best use of technology, and therefore we're not going to change anything that we're doing. So, Moore's law and the rapid rate of change, the rapid rate of how far we've come in the way that we move around in vehicles and the way that we communicate and receive entertainment and other media is changing so rapidly that it's very difficult to keep up. I reckon that's a great thing because I'm a nerd. And so, the future might not just be virtual reality, but augmented reality, where we combine the real with the imagined. So Pokemon Go, a little mobile device computing game, is just that. And you can hold the phone up with the camera activated within the app and point it at a point a few meters in front of you, and a little Pokemon will jump up and down in front of you. So fascinating to consider what that might mean in terms of how we consume media into the future. Coming out of this coronavirus shutdown, are the days of movie theaters numbered? Will people prefer to consume media entertainment from the comfort of their own home on the couch using an augmented or virtual reality tool? More importantly for us, will this change the way that we participate in sport? So we're seeing, games are becoming, pardon me, more and more prolific. Some people are making great money out of playing computer games online, which even as a nerd blows my mind. My 11-year-old son's pretty excited about the prospect of potentially making big bucks by playing online computer games. I told him only the other day, mate, you got to realize that there's a very small number of people who make any money out of that stuff. Just the same as there's a very small number of people who make money out of golf, tennis, rugby league, football, or any of the above. So sure, you can aspire to that, but maybe concentrate in class as well. So will this change the way that we participate in sport? Will we all be competing against each other on a treadmill or some other multi-directional treadmill playing a virtual game of football? Really interesting stuff to consider. And keep in mind, to go back to that transport example that I gave earlier, where we might not be driving our own cars, but we might be being driven around by computers within 20 years. It's not that far a stretch to think that we might be playing some kind of physically active but digitally engaged sport. It's a pretty good way to maintain social distancing too. So we're living right now in the future. Some of you may have made really good uses of technology in your organization already. And if you've got any really good ideas, feel free to pop them in the Q&A box, and I'll be happy to share those if we've got time at the end of the session. But significant advances in technology that have taken place over the last 10 or 15 years mean that systems that were once only available to huge multinational companies are now available to small to medium-sized businesses and not-for-profit organizations. One of the examples that I often give in this discussion is that of Apple. So Apple invested millions of dollars in its proprietary point-of-sale system that attaches to the back of an iPhone, and which means that you don't see any cash registers or tills or traditional point-of-sale units when you walk into an Apple store. Rather, each of those geniuses, and gosh, I wish I had worked at Apple so I could say I was a past genius, but each of those geniuses who you see in the Apple store are carrying around the point-of-sale system in their pocket. So Apple invests millions of dollars in this system, okay? A few short years later, we've got PayPal, Elon Musk. Yes, I did give him a nod earlier with that image of the Tesla. And yes, I do have a bit of a man crush on Elon Musk, who's a South African bloke, only a few years older than me and has more money than God. Now, Elon Musk, who invented PayPal, came up with this great idea to make merchant facilities more affordable for small businesses and not-for-profits and the like. So he invented PayPal here, which connects via Bluetooth to a smartphone and enables you to make or to take electronic payments. There's a newer player in the market, which is called Square, and we'll be talking in a little more detail over the coming weeks about that tool and others. But the thing to realize there is that there's no excuse any longer for only accepting cash payment. We are living in the future. And when I go to the Weeper BMX Club right up on the Cape York Peninsula, and I've been hearing rave reviews about their steak burgers, and I go to buy one or two because I haven't eaten all day, knowing that these burgers are something to hold out for, and I can't buy a burger because they only accept cash in their canteen, I've got a problem because I'm hungry and I want to spend money at that club, but they can't take my money. So rest assured, we've fixed that with the Whooper BMX Club, and they now accept card payment at their canteen. And their burgers are so good that they have people not involved in BMX coming from elsewhere in the town to buy their burgers. So it's no longer, in some instances, okay for not-for-profit organisations to turn their back on available technology. A lot of people don't carry cash anymore, so make it easy for people to spend money at your organisation's premises. I'm not going to tell you, and nor will any of our staff running the webinar series over the coming weeks, that you must do anything differently. But we want you to be aware of advances in technology because they can make your lives significantly easier. However, something that's really important for us to keep in mind is that technology makes a great servant and a terrible master. I'll talk a little later about the best ways for us to be conducting our research and making sure that we're really challenging which technological opportunities we're going to take up. But I'll poke a little fun now at the world of social media because I'm not personally a huge user of social media. I think I'm what they call a stalker, where I'll jump online and check out what other people are doing, but never really post or share anything myself. In a business sense, we're making, far greater use of social media all the time, and we're, continually learning and applying new tools for engaging better online. But personally, I don't spend a lot of time on social media. What I do see, though, is a whole generation of people who are absolutely the servants of their technology. And, they'll see that little icon pop up on their social media app and they've just got to check what that notification is. They've got to check what someone liked or what someone shared. And that's a really dangerous trap to fall into. So in all of this discussion about making your lives easier in your volunteer role by using available technology, just keep in mind that technology should complement the other things that we do. It shouldn't rule our lives. We often get asked, why should we change? Why should we make use of, new technology rather than just doing things the way we know how to do them, doing things the way we've always done them? Well, again, as I say, we're not going to tell you that you must do anything. We're not going to, through this series, tell you that, this system's available and you've got to use that. Rather, we're focusing on generating discussions about how you're doing things now and how you maybe could be doing things a little differently as we move into the future. And technology changes really, really quickly. So we've always got to be challenging our old ways of doing things. But really, the answer to this question is because time is really valuable. I mentioned a few weeks ago in a webinar talking about volunteer management that, we'll often pose the question to volunteers, what do you think's more important between time or money? And inevitably, sometimes we get people say that money's more important because without money, you can't do very much. We reckon time is more important. We reckon because you can always work a couple more years. In essence, you can always make more money. But once you've spent your time, you can't get it back. And I know that now, with kids, as I mentioned, who are 9 and 11, I can't for the life of me work out where the last 9 or 11 years has gone. So life flies by. The last thing we want to be doing is making our volunteers spend more time than is necessary in their roles. If we can streamline their involvement in our volunteer organisation and make their lives that little bit easier, I reckon there's a really good chance that those people are going to stay active in our organisation. Now, one of the other considerations here is that not-for-profit organisations, in our experience, typically have a significant oversensitivity to cost. And clubs need to realise that sometimes spending a little bit of money can save a lot of time. And if that keeps your volunteers happier and engaged for the long term, that's a really good outcome for your members. So Often I pick on treasurers who keep handwritten financial statements. It's a big no-no. Firstly, it's really hard to back up handwritten financial records. But secondly, there's no automation opportunity there. If you're considering some online accounting package, each of them will have or should have, any good online accounting package should have the functionality for you to connect your bank account and your accounting package. So if money shows up in your bank, it shows up in your accounting package. Sure, you might need to do some reconciliation here and there, but data entry is pretty much non-existent. So sometimes you might spend a little bit of money on some great tool for managing your financial records and preparing your financial statements for audit or verification and presentation to your board at your board meetings or your members at your AGM. But it's money well spent, because if you're saving your volunteer time and they're happier in their role, as I've said, they're more likely to stick around. It's important, though, to remember that we're not replacing the people, we're enhancing the service delivery and we're streamlining their roles. We want to save volunteer time so that those volunteers get to focus on doing the work that they enjoy or what they should be doing. And for board or committee members, that's focusing on strategic decision making and direction setting. It's not focusing on data entry. Gosh, boring, very boring. Okay, so some of the things that we'll be discussing over the coming weeks are listed on this slide. But I just wanted to run through a couple of examples to demonstrate the way that thinking is challenged in sport delivery. So we see, a real prolific expansion of the uptake of wearable technology. So people are wearing Apple Watches and they can pay for their groceries at Woolies using that tool. We're seeing, more and more gyms that get everyone when they turn up to put a little heart rate monitor on so that people can compete against each other and get their heart rate up into the red zone before anyone else in the class and so on. And largely this comes from a tragic death of an American footballer in the early thousands who died of heat stroke during a training camp. And after that tragic death, companies began to investigate ways to monitor health in real time to avoid, a repeat of that event. Wearable technology has made a huge difference in the lives of many athletes. It enables coaches to supervise pulse rate, watch hydration levels and body temperature through wireless and microscopic health tools. So really clever stuff that arguably has saved lives. The little derailleur on your mountain bike seems probably like a pretty basic feature. 1937 was the first year that the Tour de France allowed the derailleur system to be used. And until then, riders had to actually get off their bikes to switch out wheels for the uphill and downhill sections of the race. The LZR swimsuits, 98% of the swimmers who medalled in the 2008 Beijing Olympics were wearing one of these suits. After that one competition, the suit had helped break 97 world records. It was soon deemed unfair by the International Association of Swimming, or FINA. And they ruled only the next year that the suits could no longer be used in competition. But that's a great example of how technology completely changed a sport. It upset the apple cart, rather. Coach's Eye is a really cool tool that we've seen applied for probably 7 or 8 years now in a number of sports, including BMX, where someone who's learning some new skill can have someone record them. So a mum or dad, for example, they send that video to their coach. The coach can pause the video and can draw on the video itself, send that back to the player, participant, athlete, and they can watch that analysis and get coached from hundreds or thousands of kilometres away. So there's a few more examples there. The last one you'll see, point of sale. I've had a bit of a grandstand already about the fact that it's not okay to only accept cash payments anymore, and we'll certainly go into that, and I'll be ranting more come that webinar in a couple of weeks' time. So one of the other things to consider is that, you know, most of the people who are on tonight's webinar represent incorporated associations, and the legal provisions to remain incorporated are pretty simple. It's, you know, you've got to have a management committee of at least 3 people, and 2 of them have got to be president and treasurer. You've got to have an AGM at which the management committee is elected. You've got to get your financial statements verified or audited to tell your members how much money you've made in any given year. You've got to have at least 7 members, and you've got to pay about $50 to the state government each year to report them and to remain compliant. So it's pretty easy to be afforded the fantastic legal benefits of being an incorporated association. So I mean, we think at CPR Group, this is not just a personal view, but it certainly is one of mine, that organisations should always be striving for best practice, not just meeting minimum provisions. So while we've got to do those handful of things to remain compliant and therefore incorporated, organisations that are continually challenging old ways of thinking and continually looking for new and more efficient ways to deliver their services for the benefit of their members, you know, streamlined ways to do their reporting, whether it be financial or other reporting, they're the clubs that are there for the long term. They're the clubs that survive really hard times, global pandemic and you know, necessary shutdown and loss of income for months. They're the clubs that have members who sing their praises very loudly, and they're the clubs that get watched and copied by other organisations. So it's all well and good to meet the minimum standards, but we reckon that it's time for every organisation to really challenge the way that they think about doing things the same old way. And I know that there are a number of people online tonight with whom I've been talking over the past few weeks about their frustration with, you know, having come on to a management committee 12 or 18 months ago and looking around and challenging the way that things are happening and recognizing that nothing's probably changed in that organization since the 80s. So, you know, a real poor uptake of technology. And often the reason for that is just that volunteers are too busy to think about doing things differently. Volunteers are typically too busy, at least in their minds, to challenge the status quo and to apply some new system. So we get too caught up in fighting day-to-day fires and the operational conditions, provisions of running our club, that we don't think outside the square and we don't apply new thinking and look at ways to make our lives a little bit easier. So we've had a couple of good questions come in, and I'll get to those shortly, but I mentioned earlier that we'd had a discussion even as recently as today about our uptake of technology at CPR Group. So in 2011, we took our operations into the cloud for the first time. You know, the cloud being that marketing term that really just means your data stored somewhere else, accessed over the internet. So that was when we made that leap for the first time. And over the past 9 years, we've been looking at new tools that have become available, and we've made the shift in, you know, where we do our project management or our timesheet management and so on. And what we've found in subscribing to a new system only in the past 6 months or thereabouts, which is Zoho One, and this webinar is being run through Zoho One's apps. There are a whole host of other tools as part of that package, including timesheet, project management, invoicing, CRM, and so on. And what we've found is that if we had have done the research right from the outset, if we had have spent the time that we should have spent very early on looking at, you know, the full gamut of tools available And the fact that Zoho has been delivering the tools that we're using for longer than we've been in the cloud, we reckon we'd be a lot better off. Right. The lesson here is look broadly and look deeply, do the research properly, and don't rush your decision. Don't skimp on the time it takes to find the right system for you. Don't just look at a 2-minute YouTube video. And you might take advice from other users, but don't just settle on the first thing that's presented to you. Just because something works for another club doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work for your club. So you've got to have that critical discussion about what your needs are, what your strategic outcome is that you're striving towards, and how you can better achieve that making use of available technology. So, and you've got to be careful. We know that a lot of national sporting organisations are offering membership management tools and so on for the state, regional and local affiliates of theirs. And some of these are great and some of those tools aren't so great. For example, keeping a register of members is a requirement in most states and territories of incorporation legislation. And a register of members means all members, not just your players, whereas a lot of those national tools often capture only players, and they might capture coaches as well. But for those of you involved at the national sporting organisation level, certainly keep in mind that that research and that decision that you make impacts significantly down the line. So make sure you tune in over the coming weeks. We're going to be discussing a whole host of available technologies: cloud computing, packages, online file storage, digital payment tools for making more money, as I've covered, spending money electronically as easily as possible so that your members don't have to spend their own money for subsequent reimbursement, online accounting packages, direct debit services, video conferencing, online forms. I could go on. We're nerds, as you can tell, and we'll be very much looking forward to talking with you all about these and other tools over the coming weeks. I've got a couple of questions here which I'll quickly respond to. There are a few more which we'll respond to tomorrow on email or even phone call for a couple of them. How do we convince the naysayers on our committee that we should make use of new technologies? There's always going to be the naysayers. We've got to be sensitive that not everyone loves technology as much as me. That's a reality of life. There are, however, some good challenges that you can pose. And often when we come up against this resistance, and sometimes it will be in the clubs with an older demographic, but not always. And we're really careful not to just generalize in that way, because we've also worked with, some bowls and golf clubs, for example, where the committee have been really proactive and really innovative in their thinking and applying some efficiencies through the use of technology. But often people are just worried about rumors that they've heard and a lack of online or digital security, things that might not actually be true. So if there's someone who's really resistant to making better use of technology in your organization, spend the time to sit down with them and talk about what it is that they're maybe afraid of, or what their reasons are for not wanting to take up those available opportunities. And sometimes they might present something to you that you think, gosh, that's a really good idea. But hopefully, and I think in my experience, certainly more likely, is that once you talk through those issues and maybe demonstrate the use of that technology, whatever it might be, that you might break down some of those barriers to the uptake. Very good question. Okay, what is the best online accounting package? Now, we are going to be covering online tools for managing money during the webinar in a couple of weeks on the 27th of May. But what I will say tonight is really the answer of what's the best online accounting package is whichever one suits your needs best. I've kind of already picked on the treasurers out there who still do handwritten financial record keeping. And sometimes, that up until very recently has maybe been okay. But even if we make the step from that handwritten process to, for example, a spreadsheet, which can be backed up and it can be distributed digitally, that's a step in the right direction. In terms of subscription packages, we use Xero. We think Xero is great. It's recognized as a market leader in the online accounting space. But QuickBooks Online and MyOb Online are great too. Really, that depends on the preference of maybe your accountant or the people who are going to be using the tool. But again, do the research and find the tool that's going to best integrate with any other tools that you might be using for point of sale systems and so on. There are some free services like Wave, online accounting and invoicing. Saasu, SAASU, is another cheap service that I've seen used to great effect. Reckon One is another tool that's relatively affordable also. So definitely for more information on online accounting packages, tune in on the 27th of May. But I will come back to that point. Don't keep handwritten books. If you take nothing else away from this session, if your treasurer is still keeping records in a little journal or ledger, definitely have that discussion about perhaps moving on to a spreadsheet-based system. That brings us to the end of our first webinar in this digital literacy series. You'll see down there a few logos on the bottom of your screen. CPR Group provides tailored governance training for all types of sport, recreation, and community organisations around the country. Asset Track and Meeting Track, which we will be covering in a bit more detail through future webinars in this series, respectively online tools for asset management and maintenance, and preparing and running efficient meetings. We've had a really positive uptake of Meeting Track, given the fact that people in the sport and recreation industry and not-for-profits more broadly, as well as in business across the country, are all meeting remotely and having to make the best use of online meeting tools. While Meeting Track's not an online meeting platform, it is an online agenda and minute-keeping platform, and it provides a central repository for taking and keeping those minutes for the long term. So if you're interested in checking out either of those tools, simply head to assettrack.com.au, and you'll note that track is spelt only with a C, TRAC, and meetingtrack.com.au. Head there, sign up for some free trials, and if you've got any questions, we'll be more than happy to answer those at any time. Again, thank you all very much for tuning in. It's been great to have such good attendance at our webinars over the past few weeks, and we're looking forward to seeing you back in coming weeks as we continue to talk about the stuff we love in the world of technology. Once again, my name's Steve Connolly, and thank you very much for joining us. Good night.